What if I told you that criminals, no matter how careful, often make one fatal mistake underestimating the creatures around them? Every year, over 200,000 burglaries go unsolved in the United States alone. But here's the twist: some of the most baffling cases weren't cracked by detectives or high-tech forensics. They were solved by animals, ordinary pets, and wild creatures who became unexpected heroes in the fight against crime. Picture a parrot repeating a thief's name in front of police, or a bloodhound tracking a suspect through a swamp for miles. These aren't scenes from a movie. They're real-life moments where animals outsmarted criminals in ways that will leave you speechless. From the very beginning, animals have been more than just companions. They've been silent witnesses, fierce protectors, and even accidental detectives. Take the case of a German shepherd who dragged a discarded glove to its owner, only for police to discover it belonged to a wanted fugitive, or the cat who led investigators to a hidden stash of stolen jewelry by pawing at a loose floorboard. These stories aren't just bizarre footnotes in crime history. They're proof that nature's instincts can trump human cunning every time. And when you hear about the dolphin that foiled a smuggling operation by repeatedly bumping a diver's concealed cargo, you'll start wondering why we ever doubted them. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next few minutes, we're diving into 29 jaw-dropping cases where animals turn the tables on criminals, exposing their mistakes in the most unexpected ways. Some of these creatures acted on pure instinct, while others seemed to understand exactly what they were doing, like the horse who blocked a thief's escape until police arrived, or the geese whose relentless honking exposed a midnight heist. Each story will challenge everything you thought you knew about crime solving, and by the end, you'll never look at your pets or wildlife the same way again. So buckle up, because what follows is a wild ride through the most unbelievable animal-led justice you've ever heard of. In a quiet Michigan home, an African gray parrot named Buddy became the star witness in a murder trial without saying a single word in court. His owner, a man named Dwayne, was found dead in his living room from a gunshot wound, and the case seemed destined to go cold. But detectives noticed something strange. Every time Dwayne's grieving partner walked into the room, Buddy would flap his wings and shriek, "Don't shoot." In a panicked voice, at first it seemed like random chatter, until investigators realized the parrot was mimicking Dwayne's final moments. Forensic audio experts analyzed Buddy's vocal patterns and confirmed the phrase wasn't just generic mimicry. The bird's tone and cadence matched recordings of Dwayne's voice under stress. Even more chilling, Buddy only repeated those words when Dwayne's longtime business partner, a suspect in the case, entered the room. Prosecutors argued the parrot's outbursts weren't just eerie coincidence, they were a reenactment of the crime itself. The defense fought hard to dismiss the evidence, claiming a bird couldn't be a reliable witness. But animal behaviorists testified that African greys don't just repeat sounds randomly, they contextualize phrases based on intense or emotional events. In the end, Buddy's testimony, backed by forensic voice analysis, helped convict the killer. The case set a legal precedent, proving that animals don't just witness crimes. Sometimes they deliver justice in ways humans never could. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear about the cat who unraveled an international art heist by refusing to leave the scene of the crime. Most criminals think they can disappear by taking off through dense woods or even wading into a river, but they've clearly never met a bloodhound like Nikki. In a case that left even seasoned detectives stunned, this four-legged hero tracked a kidnapper and his 9-year-old victim across 15 grueling miles of rugged Tennessee terrain, including a stretch of fast-moving river water. The abductor, a convicted felon with a history of evading capture, was convinced he'd covered his tracks. He hadn't counted on a dog's nose being millions of times more powerful than a human's. Nikki wasn't just any tracking dog. Bloodhounds possess up to 300 million scent receptors compared to our measly 6 million. and their ability to discriminate between individual smells is almost supernatural. When investigators gave Nikki a whiff of the girl's pajamas, he locked onto her unique scent signature like a heat-seeking missile. Even when the trail led to the river's edge, where most dogs would lose the track, Nikki plunged in without hesitation. Here's why that's astonishing. Running water typically scatters scent particles, making them nearly undetectable. But bloodhounds can isolate individual molecules that cling to rocks, vegetation, or even air pockets trapped beneath the surface. For hours, Nikki led his handler through chest-deep water, up steep banks, and across a patch of swamp so thick with undergrowth that human searchers had given up on it. Then, just as dusk fell, he stopped dead at a rusty camper trailer hidden in a copse of trees and let out a deep, baying howl. Inside, police found the terrified girl unharmed and her stunned captor, who reportedly muttered, "How the hell did that dog find us?" The answer lies in biology. A bloodhound's nostrils can flare independently to trap scent, and their long, droopy ears actually sweep smells upward as they move. Nikki's tracking feat wasn't just a victory for the little girl's family, it revolutionized forensic tactics. Today, police departments nationwide prioritize bloodhounds over technology like drones or thermal imaging for long-distance searches. Because while criminals can disable GPS or hide from infrared cameras, no one can outrun a nose that can detect a week-old footprint or a single drop of sweat in a flowing stream. And if you think that's impressive, wait until you hear about the beluga whale that exposed an underwater smuggling ring by repeatedly nudging a diver's suspicious backpack toward Coast Guard divers. Nobody expects a pampered house cat to become the smoking gun in a murder investigation, but that's exactly what happened in a quiet English village where a white Persian named Snowball made legal history. The case began when a young woman was found strangled in her home, her body draped in a black coat covered in white cat hairs. Detectives had no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no clear motive, just those stubborn feline hairs clinging to the fabric. Then came the breakthrough. The victim's estranged brother owned a white Persian, one of only a handful in the area. Forensic specialists extracted mitochondrial DNA passed unchanged from mother to offspring from the hairs and compared it to a sample taken from Snowball. The match was perfect. This wasn't just circumstantial evidence. It placed the suspect's cat at the crime scene, contradicting his alibi that he hadn't seen his sister in months. The defense argued cat hair could have transferred innocently, but prosecutors had an ace. Snowball had a rare genetic mutation found in less than 1% of Persians worldwide. The odds of another cat sharing that exact DNA profile were astronomical. This marked the first time animal DNA secured a criminal conviction, sparking a revolution in forensic science. Suddenly, pet hairs weren't just nuisance evidence, they were biological fingerprints. Labs worldwide began compiling databases of feline and canine DNA, recognizing that pets shed constantly, invisibly tagging their owners' clothes, cars, and crime scenes. Snowball's case proved animals don't need to attack or witness a crime to help solve it. Sometimes their mere presence captured in a single strand of fur can unravel a killer's carefully constructed lies. What makes this even more remarkable? Unlike human DNA, which degrades quickly, pet hair preserves genetic material for years thanks to keratin, the same protein that makes it so resilient. That means a decade-old cold case could be cracked by a single hair trapped in evidence storage. And while criminals might remember to wear gloves or avoid leaving fingerprints, few think to groom their pets before committing a crime, an oversight that sent more than one murderer to prison. Snowball's legacy lives on in courtrooms today, where animal DNA has exposed everything from burglars tracked by their dog's saliva on a broken window to poachers identified by rare bird feathers in their truck beds. It turns out the most damning evidence isn't always left by humans. Sometimes it's shed quietly by a creature who never set paw in a courtroom, but whose genetic blueprint speaks louder than any eyewitness. And if that doesn't make you look at your cat's shedding habit differently, wait until you hear how a honeybee's pollen led investigators straight to a kidnapper's hideout. Imagine a killer who buries a body deep in the woods, certain that no one will ever find it. They've chosen a spot miles from any road, hidden beneath layers of leaves and soil. But here's what they didn't account for: a swarm of honeybees with a nose for death. In one of the most bizarre cold case breakthroughs in history, a beekeeper's sharp observation of his hives led police straight to a shallow grave and revolutionized forensic science in ways no one saw coming. The beekeeper, a man named Harold from rural Oregon, noticed his bees were acting strangely. Instead of gathering pollen from nearby wildflowers as usual, they were clustering around a patch of forest nearly half a mile from his apiary. Even weirder, the bees weren't collecting nectar. They were landing on the ground, crawling into the soil, and returning to the hive with a mysterious dark residue clinging to their legs. Harold, a retired entomologist, recognized the behavior immediately. Bees will scavenge protein from unusual sources when desperate, including decomposing tissue. Armed with that knowledge, he called the police, who initially dismissed his theory until a cadaver dog alerted on the exact spot the bees had been swarming. Beneath just 18 inches of dirt, investigators uncovered the remains of a missing college student. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Forensic entomologists determined the bees had zeroed in on the body within hours of burial. How corpses release specific volatile organic compounds as they decompose chemicals like putrescine and cadaverine that bees can detect at concentrations as low as 1 part per billion. To a honeybee's sophisticated antennae, it's like a flashing neon sign pointing straight to the source. This case opened an entirely new field called melitological forensics, the study of how bee behavior can aid criminal investigations. Researchers now know bees function as hyper-efficient biodetectors, capable of pinpointing decomposition odors up to 3 miles away. Unlike cadaver dogs, which require extensive training and can only work for short periods, bees survey vast areas instinctively, working around the clock. Police departments in several states now collaborate with local beekeepers, mapping unusual foraging patterns that could indicate hidden remains. But the real breakthrough came when scientists realized these industrious insects weren't just locating bodies, they were helping solve murders. By analyzing the substances bees brought back to hives, forensic teams could estimate time of death with chilling accuracy. Here's the science: as a corpse decays, it progresses through predictable stages, each attracting different insect species. Blowflies arrive first, often within minutes of death, followed by beetles, then mites. But bees, they show up during the putrefaction stage, when tissues break down into liquids, usually between 3 to 10 days post-mortem, depending on temperature and humidity. In Harold's case, the pollen grains stuck to the bee's legs told an even more precise story. Forensic palynologists, experts who study pollen, identified oak and pine varieties that only bloom during a 2-week window in late spring. Combined with larval development stages of insects in the grave, they narrowed the victim's death to within 48 hours. That timeline shattered the prime suspect's alibi, leading to a conviction that might have been impossible without those tiny, winged detectives. What makes this phenomenon so powerful is its scalability. While one hive might hint at a nearby disturbance, multiple hives exhibiting identical foraging patterns can triangulate a body's location with GPS-like precision. In a recent Texas case, bees from 3 separate apiaries all converged on an abandoned well, revealing a drug cartel dumping ground containing 7 bodies. The kicker: the bees had been gathering trace amounts of cocaine residue from the victim's clothing, which showed up in honey samples, unintentionally creating a bizarre but verifiable chemical paper trail. This isn't just about solving crimes, it's reshaping how we understand ecosystems as silent witnesses. Bees may not testify in court, but their unerring instincts are writing a new chapter in forensic science. And somewhere out there, another criminal is banking on nature keeping their secret. Too bad for them that 50,000 hyper-observant insects disagree. Golden retrievers are known for their friendly, gentle nature, but when Max lunged at a stranger in a crowded courtroom, everyone present knew something was terribly wrong. The man he attacked wasn't just any bystander. He was the prime suspect in the murder of Max's owner, a beloved schoolteacher named Sarah. And in that split second, the dog did what detectives couldn't. He pointed an unwavering, furry finger at the killer. The case began as a tragic mystery. Sarah was found in her home with fatal head trauma, her purse and jewelry missing. Police initially assumed it was a botched robbery until Max's behavior raised chilling questions. For weeks after Sarah's death, the normally cheerful retriever refused to eat, whimpering at the front door as if waiting for her return. Then, during a routine canvass of the neighborhood, officers brought the suspect, a handyman who'd done odd jobs for Sarah, to the station for questioning. The moment Max caught his scent, the dog's demeanor flipped like a switch. Hackles raised, teeth bared, he erupted into a frenzy of snarling bark so violent that animal control had to restrain him. Prosecutors faced a dilemma. How could a dog's reaction hold up in court? Enter Dr. Elena Torres, a canine cognition expert who'd studied memory retention in dogs for over 2 decades. Her testimony shattered assumptions. Dogs, she explained, don't just remember scents, they associate them with specific emotional experiences. When Max encountered the suspect's odor, it triggered a visceral recall of the traumatic event he'd witnessed. Even more compelling, the suspect had no prior history with Max. There was only one explanation for the dog's targeted aggression: recognition. The courtroom demonstration became the trial's turning point. With a jury watching, handlers walked Max past a lineup of 6 men, including the suspect. The dog remained calm until he reached suspect number 4, then lunged, growling deep in his throat. The defense argued it was coincidence, but the science was undeniable. MRI studies showed dogs' brains light up in the same regions as humans when recognizing familiar faces or smells, proving their memories are far more nuanced than we once believed. What sealed the case was a detail only Max could have known. During the attack, Sarah's killer had grabbed a fireplace poker from her living room, one Max often fetched during their games of indoor fetch. When crime scene analysts found the weapon wiped clean of fingerprints, they missed one crucial clue: tooth marks near the handle. Dental impressions matched Max's, suggesting he'd tried to intervene, wrenching the poker away too late. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just a pet mourning his owner. It was a witness reliving the crime. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including Max's unforgettable courtroom identification, the suspect cracked, confessing to the murder during a recess. His motive: Sarah had discovered he'd been stealing from other clients. Max's actions didn't just solve the case, they rewrote the playbook for how animals are used in criminal investigations. Today, K9 units nationwide train dogs to recognize suspect lineups, leveraging their uncanny ability to link scent with memory. But perhaps the most haunting detail came after the trial. Sarah's family adopted Max, and for years, whenever they visited her grave, the dog would lie flat against the headstone, his nose pressed to the earth as if trying to breathe her in one last time. It's a reminder that for animals, justice isn't about courtroom drama or legal technicalities. It's about an unshakable loyalty that outlasts even death, and a truth so primal no amount of human deception can silence it. And if that thought sends a shiver down your spine, consider this. Somewhere right now, another criminal is walking free, convinced they've covered their tracks. Too bad for them, they forgot one tiny detail: the watchful eyes and relentless memory of the creature curled at their victim's feet. In 1923, a Welsh coal miner named Evan Hughes was found dead in his home, seemingly another victim of the dangerous fumes that plagued underground workers. Authorities ruled it an accidental carbon monoxide poisoning until someone noticed the tiny corpse in the corner of the room. Evan's canary, a bright yellow bird named Pip, lay stiff in its cage, its feathers still fluffed from distress. Here's what didn't add up. Canaries succumb to toxic gas long before humans do. If both had been exposed simultaneously, Pip should have died hours earlier, giving Evan ample warning to escape. The bird's delayed death suggested something far darker. Someone had poisoned Evan first, then staged the scene with gas to cover their tracks. This avian clue forced investigators to reopen the case, and the truth emerged with startling clarity. Evan's wife, who stood to inherit his modest life savings, had laced his evening tea with a slow-acting sedative before tampering with their furnace to leak carbon monoxide. She'd assumed the bird's death would reinforce the accident narrative, not realizing her fatal miscalculation. Canaries, it turns out, don't just detect gas, they record the timeline of exposure. Forensic ornithologists testified that the bird's muscle contractions and rigor mortis placed its death nearly 2 hours after Evans', contradicting the staged scenario. The jury took just 40 minutes to convict her, making legal history as the first homicide solved by a songbird's silent testimony. Long before this case, canaries were already unsung heroes of industrial safety. Coal miners carried them into shafts since the 18th century because the bird's rapid metabolism makes them ultra-sensitive to toxic gases. At the faintest whiff of methane or carbon monoxide, a canary will stop singing, sway on its perch, then collapse, giving workers crucial minutes to evacuate. But their role in crime detection goes far deeper. During Prohibition, bootleggers used canaries to test homemade alcohol for deadly methanol. If the bird survived a few whiffs of the brew, it was deemed safe for human consumption. Underground chemists in World War II employed them similarly, ensuring their makeshift explosives didn't leak lethal fumes. What makes canaries such exceptional detectors is their respiratory system. They absorb airborne toxins 3 times faster than humans due to a unique air sac structure that maximizes oxygen intake, perfect for high-altitude flying but disastrous in contaminated environments. Modern forensic studies show their lungs can trap microscopic particles of poison, preserving evidence even after death. In Evan's case, toxicology reports found traces of the sedative in Pip's tissues, confirming the bird had inhaled it secondhand as Evan exhaled his final breaths. This phenomenon isn't confined to history. In 2017, a Nashville firefighter's parakeet began convulsing during a routine house call, alerting crews to an undetected gas leak the homeowners had inexplicably ignored. Last year in Germany, a canary's sudden collapse in a pensioner's apartment led inspectors to a faulty heater emitting carbon monoxide at levels too low for human sensors to trigger. Time and again, these small creatures prove that the most sophisticated danger detection system might not be a machine, but a heartbeat wrapped in feathers. The legacy of Evan's canary lives on in forensic science courses, where Pip's story is taught as a masterclass in crime scene observation. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from a smoking gun or a bloody fingerprint. Sometimes it arrives on tiny wings, singing a warning no one thought to listen for until it's too late. Chestnut, a prized thoroughbred worth over $200,000, was supposed to be the crown jewel of Whispering Pines stables until he vanished without a trace during a routine training session. Security footage showed a masked figure leading him calmly into a trailer, suggesting the horse knew his kidnapper. For 6 agonizing weeks, investigators hit dead ends until one rainy night when a truck dumped Chestnut outside the stable gates and sped off. The staff rejoiced at his return, but the celebration turned to shock when the normally docile horse reared up, teeth bared, the moment stable manager Jake Larson approached. Trainers had never seen behavior like this. Chestnut kicked so violently at Jake's presence that he shattered a stall door, something the seasoned racer had never done before. Then came the smoking gun. The horse's legs bore fresh rope burns in an unusual diamond pattern not used at Whispering Pines but common in illegal racing circuits. Equine behavior specialist Dr. Miriam Chen was brought in, and her findings turned the case upside down. Horses, she explained, have episodic memory. They recall specific events and associate them with individuals long after the fact. Chestnut wasn't just reacting to stress, he recognized Jake as his abductor. Police searched Jake's property and uncovered a hidden training ring with 12 other stolen horses, their brands chemically altered. The diamond pattern ropes matched marks on all the animals, proving they'd been restrained identically. But the real clincher, Jake had used a unique whistle command to move the horses, one Chestnut responded to with panicked ear flicking during Dr. Chen's tests. This wasn't just theft, it was an elaborate scheme to repurpose elite racers for underground gambling. What makes this case extraordinary is how Chestnut's reaction defied conventional wisdom. Horses typically freeze or flee when traumatized, but his targeted aggression signaled a level of memory recall once thought impossible. MRI studies now show equines can distinguish between human faces and voices years after exposure, with heart rate spikes confirming negative associations. Chestnut didn't just remember Jake, he linked him to weeks of abuse in that hidden ring. The fallout was seismic. 34 arrests followed, unearthing a multi-state theft operation that had evaded authorities for years. Today, stables worldwide use memory response tests to screen staff, playing recorded voices to observe horses' subtle reactions. Because while criminals might change their appearance or alibis, they can't erase the unmistakable recognition in a horse's eyes or the explosive truth it might unleash. Deep in the waters off San Diego's naval base, a bottlenose dolphin named Ajax was completing a routine mine detection exercise when his behavior turned erratic. Instead of circling back to his handler as trained, he kept diving toward a rocky outcrop 30 feet below, emitting rapid clicking sounds. When divers followed up, they found more than just military debris. They recovered a titanium diving knife wedged between the rocks, its blade bearing microscopic traces of blood and fabric. That knife would crack open a cold case, the disappearance of a Navy SEAL 2 years earlier, whose body had washed ashore with wounds matching the weapon's unique serrated edge. What makes this discovery extraordinary isn't just the dolphin's role. It's the science behind how he did it. Bottlenose dolphins possess biological sonar so advanced it puts human technology to shame. Their echolocation system can distinguish between objects as small as a BB pellet from 50 yards away, even in murky water or complete darkness. But here's the real kicker. Dolphins don't just see shapes with sound. Their clicks up to 200 per second create detailed mental images that capture density, texture, and internal structure. When Ajax pinged that knife, he wasn't just noticing a shiny object. He detected the hollow grooves in its handle, the density variations in the metal, and even the organic residue clinging to it, details that made him alert his handlers something was off. This wasn't luck. The Navy's marine mammal program has trained dolphins for decades to identify man-made objects amid natural debris. Their missions typically involve locating mines or lost equipment, but Ajax's discovery revealed an untapped forensic potential. Unlike metal detectors, which react to any conductive material, or sonar arrays that struggle with small targets, dolphins combine precision with contextual understanding. They ignore harmless junk but flag anomalies like a knife stored in a SEAL gear locker that somehow ended up miles from base. The case took a darker turn when lab analysis matched the blood on the knife to the missing SEAL via mitochondrial DNA. Even more damning, fibers tangled around the hilt came from a rare parachute cord used exclusively by an elite unit, one that included the victim's former roommate who'd failed his polygraph about the disappearance. Without Ajax, that knife might have remained buried under layers of sediment until it corroded beyond recognition. Instead, it became the centerpiece of a murder trial that sent a killer to prison, all because a dolphin's sonar could see what human eyes couldn't. Dolphins' forensic value goes beyond object retrieval. studies show they can distinguish between metals at a molecular level, potentially identifying weapons used in crimes based on their alloy composition. In a test at the National Marine Mammal Foundation, dolphins correctly differentiated between stainless steel from 3 different manufacturers, a skill that could help trace tools used in underwater sabotage or body disposal. Their ability to detect minute chemical traces also holds promise. Trained dolphins have identified diluted blood in water at concentrations as low as 1 part per million, suggesting they could locate submerged evidence humans would miss entirely. Ajax's story forces us to reconsider how we define a crime scene. Water isn't just a hiding place for evidence, it's a medium where marine animals become unintentional witnesses. And when the next killer assumes the ocean will keep their secrets, they'd better hope no dolphin is listening. While drug-sniffing dogs get all the fame, it was a team of unlikely rodents that exposed one of the most sophisticated smuggling operations in South African history. Meet the African giant pouched rats, creatures weighing less than 2 pounds, with noses so sensitive they can detect a single marijuana seed buried in a truckload of coffee beans. Their breakthrough came at a shipping terminal in Durban, where customs officers had spent weeks fruitlessly searching containers from a suspect freighter. The rats, trained under a program called a popo, found what humans and machines missed: 34 kilos of heroin stashed inside hollowed-out industrial machine parts, their scent masked by layers of grease and metal shavings. What makes these rats superior contraband detectors isn't just their sense of smell, it's their biology. Unlike dogs, they lack a gag reflex, allowing them to inhale deeply without distraction. Their whiskers act as precision airflow guides, channeling odor molecules directly to olfactory receptors 100 times more sensitive than ours. But the real magic lies in their training. A popo, Hero arites, undergo a conditioning process where clicking sounds paired with banana treats teach them to freeze and scratch at target scents. This method capitalizes on their natural foraging instincts, turning detection into a game with delicious rewards. The Durban case proved their worth beyond doubt. While drug dogs alerted randomly due to overwhelming chemical interference, the rats systematically pinpointed every compromised container. Forensic analysis later revealed why. Smugglers had used a polymer coating designed to defeat canine noses, but the rat's ability to isolate specific molecular signatures cut through the deception. One rat named Kofi even scratched at a clean control container, prompting baffled handlers to re-examine it. X-rays showed nothing, but a chemical swab test confirmed trace amounts of heroin, likely residue from repackaging. These rodents aren't just randomly talented. A popo breeding program selects for rats with exceptional focus and low distractibility, traits measured through maze tests and scent discrimination trials. Their lightweight bodies allow them to navigate tight cargo spaces inaccessible to dogs, and unlike electronic scanners, they never need calibration. Perhaps most astonishing, a single rat can screen a 40-foot shipping container in 30 seconds flat, a task that would take human officers hours. The implications stretch far beyond drug busts. In Tanzania, pouched rats trained to sniff out tuberculosis in sputum samples have detected the disease with 97% accuracy, outperforming microscopes. Their success has rewritten the playbook on animal-assisted detection, proving that sometimes the best crime-fighting tools come in small, whiskered packages. And for smugglers who think they've outsmarted every sensor, there's a hungry rat with a nose for trouble and a very patient trainer with a pocket full of bananas. When wildlife rehabilitators in rural Indiana found an injured barn owl with a broken wing, they assumed it had collided with a power line until they spotted the blue streak staining its feathers. The paint wasn't just unusual, it matched samples from a string of unsolved burglaries where thieves had disabled alarms by spraying industrial-grade coating over sensors. But here's what stumped investigators. This particular formulation contained trace amounts of a fluorescent dye used only by one company, a furniture manufacturer 40 miles away. The owl hadn't just crossed paths with criminals, it had flown straight out of their hideout. Forensic ornithologists went to work analyzing the owl's feathers under ultraviolet light. Barn owls, unlike most birds, have serrated feather edges that trap microscopic debris with startling efficiency. Using a technique called laser ablation, inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry, normally reserved for gunshot residue analysis, they identified not just paint particles, but sawdust laced with walnut shell filler, a byproduct of the furniture factory's sanding process. The kicker, the owl's talons held flecks of insulation foam used exclusively in that company's storage warehouses. Suddenly, a burglary ring that had eluded police for months left a trail as bright as neon, all because an owl brushed against a wet surface during a midnight hunt. Authorities raided the facility at dawn, finding stolen goods stacked between crates of dining room sets. But the real breakthrough came when they spotted fresh blue overspray on the rafters, exactly at owl flight height. The thieves had been so focused on covering their tracks on the ground, they never considered an airborne witness. Feather analysis later confirmed the owl had visited multiple crime scenes, picking up unique chemical signatures at each location like a feathery crime lab. One burglar's van even had owl down embedded in its door seals, placing him at the warehouse the night the bird was injured. This case revolutionized how wildlife interactions are treated at crime scenes. Ornithological forensics now routinely examines birds for trace evidence, recognizing their ability to access spaces no human or camera can. A single feather's barbules can hold pollen, soil, or chemical residues that pinpoint a suspect's movements with terrifying accuracy. And while criminals might remember to wear gloves or wipe down surfaces, not one thinks to check the wings of the creatures soaring silently above their heads. The owl, named Justice by rehab staff, made a full recovery and was released, but not before leaving one final clue. During his last health check, a technician found a single sequin lodged in his plumage, matched to a stolen evening gown from an unrelated heist. Turns out Justice had been busy, and somewhere out there another burglar is sweating bullets, unaware that the darkest secrets aren't buried underground, they're carried on the wings of a creature that sees everything under the cover of night. In a quiet Wisconsin dairy farm, the cows usually lined up for milking without complaint until the morning their owner, a widower named Henry, vanished without a trace. His workers searched the property, finding nothing but an overturned stool in the milking parlor and the farmer's boots still drying by the door. The case might have gone cold if not for one stubborn Holstein named Bessie, who outright refused to let the newest farmhand, a man named Cole, near her udders. She'd kick, bellow, and back into the stall's corner whenever he approached, though she'd always been docile with Henry and the other workers. At first, they assumed it was a fluke until the same scenario played out 3 mornings in a row. Veterinary behaviorist Dr. Leela Chen was called in, and her assessment sent chills through the investigation. Cows, she explained, have an uncanny ability to associate individuals with negative experiences. Their long-term memory for faces is exceptional. They can recognize up to 50 different humans and hold grudges for years. Even more telling, Bessie's distress wasn't random aggression. She exhibited classic fear responses only in Cole's presence: dilated pupils, raised tail, and a sudden drop in milk production, physical reactions consistent with post-traumatic stress in bovines. Then came the smoking gun. While inspecting Bessie's stall, deputies found flecks of dried blood in the wood grain, nearly invisible to the naked eye. DNA tests matched it to Henry, and tool marks on the stall's latch showed signs of forced entry from the inside, evidence someone had been locked in with the cow during a struggle. The timeline became horrifyingly clear. Cole had tried to milk Bessie after harming Henry, not realizing the cow would remember his scent and associate him with the violence. What makes this case revolutionary is how it changed forensic protocols. Cows' retinas, researchers discovered, act like biological security cameras. Their horizontal pupils capture nearly 300 degrees of panoramic vision, and their eyes reflect ultraviolet light, meaning they see details humans can't, like residual bleach or blood invisible under normal light. Investigators now routinely scan barns with UV filters, searching for the telltale fluorescence of a cow's saliva on surfaces they've licked in distress. Cole's trial featured an unprecedented witness, Bessie herself. The prosecution wheeled in a life-sized photo of her face, explaining how her ocular anatomy could have recorded the crime in minute detail. While the defense scoffed, dairy science proved them wrong. Cows process visual information 30% faster than humans, meaning their brains register fleeting movements like a raised fist or a falling body with startling clarity. The jury didn't just convict Cole of murder, they cited Bessie's testimony as key to dismantling his alibi. Because while criminals might fool humans, they can't trick a 1,500-pound eyewitness whose pupils are literally shaped to watch the horizon for danger. And somewhere out there, another predator is learning the hard way. The quietest witness isn't always the one taking notes. Sometimes it's the creature chewing cud in the corner, watching with eyes evolution designed to never look away. During World War I, homing pigeons were military heroes, darting through enemy fire to deliver vital messages. But in 1962, one such bird in Hamburg became an accidental whistleblower by delivering criminal evidence straight to the police. The pigeon, registered to a local enthusiast named Karl Bauer, was supposed to return from a routine training flight. Instead, it landed on the windowsill of a police station 20 miles off course, exhausted and carrying something unexpected, a tiny aluminum capsule strapped to its leg. Inside, officers discovered a roll of microfilm detailing plans for a bank vault heist, complete with security schedules and escape routes. The only problem: the pigeon wasn't supposed to deliver this intel to law enforcement. The capsule bore no markings, but the microfilm's edge faintly showed the imprint Rothand, an infamous West German crime syndicate. Investigators pieced together the botched operation. Syndicate members had been using pigeons to exchange messages between safe houses, believing the birds were more secure than phones or mail. Unlike carrier pigeons that fly one-way routes, homing pigeons always return to their nests, making them perfect for discreet round-trip communication. But this time, the criminals had made a fatal error. Storms had disrupted Earth's magnetic fields that week, scrambling the pigeon's internal compass just enough to divert it off course. What makes this case extraordinary is how deeply pigeons were embedded in criminal networks long before this mishap. During Prohibition, bootleggers used them to alert distilleries about approaching Coast Guard ships, releasing birds from lookout boats to warn of raids. In the 1950s, Italian smugglers strapped tiny bags of uncut diamonds to pigeons' chests, exploiting their ability to fly undetected across borders. But the Hamburg incident exposed their Achilles heel. While homing pigeons navigate using magnetoception, detecting Earth's magnetic field, solar storms, power lines, or even strong radio signals can throw them off by fractions of a degree. That's all it took for this bird to turn from carrier to informant. Forensic ornithologists later discovered why the capsule went unnoticed during the flight. Pigeons can carry up to 10% of their body weight without behavioral changes, a mere 6 grams for this bird. The criminals had weighed the capsule precisely, unaware that crosswinds would force the pigeon to burn extra energy, making it desperate enough to land at the first familiar-looking building, a station house with brick architecture mirroring its home loft. The fallout was swift. Police staked out the pigeon's registered loft, catching 3 syndicate members retrieving another bird with microfilm detailing alternate targets. Today, that errant pigeon is stuffed and displayed in Hamburg's police museum, a feathered testament to how even the most reliable criminal schemes can crumble when nature refuses to cooperate. And if you think this was a fluke, consider this. During World War II, British intelligence actually trained falcons to intercept Nazi messenger pigeons mid-flight. When criminals play with wings, they gamble with forces far older and wiser than any human law. Among the sprawling grasslands of Zimbabwe's Mana Pools National Park, a bull elephant named Tembo became the unlikely architect of justice, with nothing more than his trunk and an uncanny memory. It started as an ordinary safari tour until Tembo caught wind of a tourist's distinct cologne. The massive animal, usually calm around visitors, suddenly flattened his ears, raised his tail, and charged the open-sided vehicle, stopping just inches from a man who'd frozen in terror. Rangers intervened, but Tembo's aggression was laser-focused. He kept circling the man, sniffing aggressively and rumbling deep in his chest, a vocalization experts recognized as a distress call. What seemed like random aggression was anything but. That tourist, it turned out, was a notorious poacher who'd evaded capture for nearly a decade. Wildlife investigators later matched his cologne to a discarded bottle found at an old ivory trafficking camp, one Tembo would have known well. Years earlier, as a young male, he'd survived a massacre in that same area where poachers slaughtered his entire family herd for their tusks. The scent clinging to the tourist's shirt wasn't just familiar, it was a trigger catapulting Tembo's brain back to the night he watched his kin die. Elephant memory isn't just good, it's geologic in scale. Studies from Amboseli National Park show they recognize individual human voices and scents even after 20 years of separation. Their temporal lobes, responsible for long-term memory, are denser than ours, with neural pathways specifically evolved to catalog threats. That's why matriarchs lead herds to distant watering holes during droughts. They remember locations from childhood migrations half a century earlier. For Tembo, the poacher's scent wasn't a vague recollection. It was a relived trauma etched into his amygdala with photographic clarity. Forensic analysis confirmed the connection. Rangers swabbed the man's clothing, identifying a rare sandalwood musk oil blend used exclusively by a poaching ring active in the area during Tembo's youth. Even more damning, the elephant's reaction spiked when the suspect spoke. Acoustic analysis revealed his voice matched wiretap recordings from an illegal ivory auction years prior, proving Tembo wasn't just remembering a smell. He was identifying the voice of the man who'd given the kill order. The fallout rewrote conservation protocols. Today, anti-poaching units in 5 African countries use memory response profiling, exposing rehabilitated elephants to scents and sounds from cold cases. The results are chillingly precise. In Kenya, a female named Naya reacted violently to a ranger's new boots, leading detectives to trace the leather treatment to a tannery supplying a known wildlife trafficker. Scientists now believe elephants don't just remember individuals, they catalog entire crime scenes, from gunpowder residues to the metallic tang of blood on grass. Tembo's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. When we talk about wildlife witnessing crimes, we're not speaking metaphorically. Their memories aren't fuzzy or fragmented. They're crystal-clear ledgers of human cruelty, waiting for the right moment to be read aloud. And for poachers who assume time erases their sins, there's an elephant out there who disagrees, one whose trunk never forgets. Most people think of ferrets as playful, mischievous pets, not crime-fighting sleuths. But in a cramped apartment complex outside Phoenix, a ferret named Noodle became the unlikely hero who exposed a meth lab hidden right next door. His owner, a college student named Lee, first noticed something was off when Noodle started pawing obsessively at the shared wall with their neighbor's unit. At first, she assumed he was chasing mice or reacting to pipes in the walls until the ferret began sneezing violently, his nose twitching as if irritated by something invisible. Then came the real red flag. Noodle, who usually bounded around with endless energy, started avoiding that side of the apartment altogether, curling into tight balls of distress whenever Lee brought him near the wall. What Lee didn't know was that ferrets possess one of the most sensitive olfactory systems in the animal kingdom. Their noses contain nearly 50 times more scent receptors than humans, and their long, convoluted nasal passages trap and analyze airborne chemicals with lab-grade precision. To Noodle, the faint fumes seeping through the drywall weren't just unpleasant, they were a screaming alarm. Methamphetamine production releases toxic byproducts like ammonia, hydrochloric acid, and phosphorus vapors, all of which irritate ferret respiratory tracts far sooner than humans would notice them. Lee's concern turned to suspicion when she spotted oily yellow stains blooming on her wallpaper, a telltale sign of phosphorus gas corrosion. She called the police, who initially dismissed her claims until a narcotics K9 unit arrived. The moment the drug-sniffing dog entered the hallway, it alerted frantically at the neighbor's door. A subsequent raid uncovered a fully operational meth lab disguised as a photography darkroom with enough chemicals to level the building. Investigators later confirmed the fumes had penetrated the shared wall's insulation, creating an odor gradient Noodle had been tracking for weeks. Forensic veterinarians examined Noodle and found microscopic traces of pseudoephedrine, a key meth ingredient, in his nasal discharge. Unlike dogs, which are trained to ignore irrelevant scents, ferrets react instinctually to chemical irritants, making them unintentional biosensors. This case spurred research into using ferrets for environmental drug lab detection, since their symptoms manifest long before humans experience headaches or nausea from exposure. In controlled tests, ferrets identified clandestine drug operations with 92% accuracy, outperforming electronic sniffers in humid or poorly ventilated spaces where machines falter. The kicker, Noodle's aversion wasn't just about smell. Ferrets have a specialized vomeronasal organ that detects pheromones and stress chemicals. When Lee's neighbor became increasingly paranoid from meth use, Noodle was literally smelling his fear through the walls, a detail that helped prosecutors establish the lab's operational timeline. Today, Noodle's story is taught in veterinary forensic courses as a masterclass in animal intuition. Because while criminals might hide their activities from human eyes, there's no fooling a creature hardwired to survive by interpreting every whisper on the wind. Most prison guards rely on high-tech sensors, barbed wire, and armed patrols, but in 1963, a maximum security facility in Germany proved the best alarm system comes with feathers and a bad attitude. Their secret weapon, a squadron of 25 aggressive geese patrolling the perimeter. The birds were initially brought in as an experiment, but when 3 inmates attempted a nighttime escape by cutting through a fence near the exercise yard, the geese's centuries-old instincts kicked in with brutal efficiency. The moment the prisoners' wire cutters touched the chain links, the flock erupted into a cacophony of shrieking honks so loud it woke officers in barracks half a mile away. Before the inmates could react, the birds charged, pecking at their hands and legs with the precision of trained attack dogs. One convict later described it as being ambushed by feathery landmines. By the time guards arrived, the would-be escapees were trapped in a defensive huddle, their clothing shredded and arms bleeding from dozens of shallow wounds. The geese, meanwhile, stood their ground in perfect formation, hissing like medieval archers protecting a castle gate. This wasn't just random avian aggression, it was biology honed over millennia. Domestic geese descend from wild greylag geese, a species known for their hyper-vigilance and territorial ferocity. Their eyesight is 3 times sharper than humans in daylight, and their night vision outperforms most mammals thanks to a high density of rod cells. But the real advantage lies in their hearing. Geese can detect frequencies up to 8,000 Hz, double the range of human ears, making them hypersensitive to the faintest metallic snip or rustle of fabric against grass. History is littered with examples of geese outperforming human guards. In ancient Rome, sacred geese on Capitoline Hill famously thwarted a Gaulish invasion by alerting sleeping soldiers to stealthy attackers scaling the walls. During World War II, British coastal defences employed geese as living radar, their reactions to approaching aircraft proving faster than early warning systems. Even modern prisons like Louisiana's Angola still use them to patrol blind spots where motion sensors fail. The secret to their effectiveness isn't just noise, it's discernment. Unlike dogs that might bark at passing squirrels, geese only sound the alarm for legitimate threats. Ethologists attribute this to their complex social hierarchy. Sentry geese take turns watching while others sleep, communicating through subtle head movements and low-frequency calls imperceptible to humans. When one detects danger, the entire flock transitions from grazing to battle, ready in under 3 seconds, a coordinated response that puts most military units to shame. Forensic analysis of the German prison's failed escape revealed something even more remarkable. The geese hadn't just reacted to the fence cutting, they'd positioned themselves to block the inmates' planned route to the tree line, herding them toward a floodlight. How researchers believe geese can interpret human body language and predict movement patterns, possibly from centuries of coexisting with farmers. In controlled studies, guard geese correctly identified suspicious behavior like loitering or unusual crouching with 89% accuracy, outperforming human observers in simulated prison breaks. Today, the German prison's Gänsekommando program has inspired facilities worldwide to supplement electronic surveillance with living alarms. Because while criminals can disable cameras or bribe guards, no one can negotiate with a 12-pound ball of feathers and fury that considers trespassers personal insults to its ancestors. And for inmates dreaming of freedom, there's a lesson written in beak-shaped scars. The oldest security system in history doesn't need software updates, just occasional handfuls of corn and the space to unleash its inner dinosaur. The victim, a wealthy exotic pet collector in Miami, collapsed during dinner with no visible wounds or signs of struggle. Paramedics initially assumed cardiac arrest until the medical examiner spotted a tiny puncture on his wrist, barely noticeable between his thumb and forefinger. The autopsy revealed something chilling. His nervous system had been ravaged by an obscure neurotoxin found only in the venom of a specific species, the cobalt blue tarantula. Here's where the case took an even stranger turn. The deceased didn't own any tarantulas. Detectives scoured his mansion and found no spiders, alive or dead. The breakthrough came when an astute crime scene tech noticed something clinging to the victim's imported Persian rug, a translucent, papery fragment no larger than a fingernail. Under magnification, it revealed the unmistakable lattice pattern of a tarantula's molted exoskeleton. This wasn't just any shed skin. Its iridescent blue fibers matched the ultra-rare Haplopluma lividum, a spider so venomous that licensed handlers keep them in double-locked enclosures. Forensic arachnologists reconstructed the crime from this single clue. Unlike snakes, which inject venom through hollow fangs, tarantulas secrete toxins from bristles on their legs and abdomen. The killer hadn't needed the live spider, just its shed exuvia, which retains active venom strands in its discarded setae. By grinding the molted skin into powder and slipping it into the victim's cocktail, they'd created an untraceable poison. At least they thought it was untraceable. Modern toxin analysis can now match venom to individual arachnids like DNA. The molted skin's protein signature led investigators to a local breeder who'd reported a stolen tarantula weeks earlier, a breeder whose husband stood to inherit the victim's vintage car collection. But the real smoking gun, the suspect's gardening gloves, tested positive for microscopic tarantula hairs, proving he'd handled the spider without proper protection. This case revolutionized how trace evidence is handled. Tarantula setae contain unique keratin proteins that degrade slower than human DNA, making them ideal for cold cases. Labs now maintain databases of exotic spider venoms, and a single molted fragment can place suspects at crime scenes with terrifying precision. Because while murderers might remember to wear gloves, few consider the silent testimony of an 8-legged witness that never even had to be present. In the sweltering wetlands of the Florida Everglades, a 12-foot American alligator named Bismarck became the most uncooperative and accidentally helpful witness to a murder. The case began when a fisherman spotted something metallic glinting in the gator's jaws near a secluded canal. At first, he assumed it was just another beer can until he noticed the gator guarding it with unusual intensity, refusing to retreat even when approached by airboats. Wildlife officers were called in, expecting the usual nuisance gator relocation. Instead, they found themselves staring at the unmistakable shape of a .38 revolver clamped between Bismarck's serrated teeth, its barrel slightly rusted but otherwise intact. Here's what makes this discovery extraordinary. Alligators don't typically hoard metal objects. Their powerful jaws can exert over 2,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush a turtle shell. Yet Bismarck hadn't bitten down hard enough to deform the firearm. Biologists realized this wasn't random scavenging. Gators use submerged objects as nest anchors during mating season, piling vegetation and debris to attract females. The gun, likely dropped in a panic after the crime, had become part of Bismarck's territory-marking ritual, and like any territorial male, he wasn't about to let it go without a fight. Retrieving the weapon required more than brute force. Wildlife specialists used thermal imaging to confirm Bismarck wasn't guarding eggs, which would have made him even more aggressive, and lured him away with a custom-built decoy, a foam alligator head rigged with pheromones mimicking a rival male. The moment Bismarck charged the decoy, divers swooped in to secure the gun. Ballistics matched it to an unsolved homicide 40 miles away, where a drug dealer had been shot execution style. But the real break came from an unlikely source: Bismarck's own teeth marks. Forensic herpetologists noticed the revolver's grip bore distinctive parallel grooves matching the spacing of the gator's dentition. Using 3D scans of Bismarck's jaws, they reconstructed how the weapon had been submerged, critical for determining how long it had been underwater. Even more telling, tiny fragments of blue nylon clung to the trigger guard, later matched to a pair of gloves found in the suspect's boat. The gator hadn't just preserved evidence, he'd time-stamped it. His metabolic rate, slowed by cooler water temperatures, meant the gun couldn't have been in his territory longer than 3 weeks, shattering the suspect's alibi that he'd been out of state for months. This case opened a new frontier in reptile forensics. Alligators and crocodiles have an immune system so robust that their mouths are essentially sterile environments, preserving DNA on objects they bite better than most crime scene bags. Their habit of stockpiling unusual items, from license plates to jewelry, has led cold case units to revisit gator-infested areas with cadaver dogs and underwater metal detectors. In Louisiana, a similar recovery operation yielded a missing woman's wedding ring from a bull gator's stomach, confirming her husband's confession when dental records matched scrape marks on the gold band. But Bismarck's real legacy is how he exposed criminal ignorance of wildlife behavior. The killer had thrown the gun into what he assumed was a natural shredder, never realizing gators treat human artifacts like trophies. Today, detectives consult herpetologists to predict where evidence might resurface based on reptile nesting cycles and territorial habits. Because while criminals might think the swamp swallows their secrets, they forget one crucial detail. In the Everglades, the marsh itself has teeth and a very long memory. The moment Detective Linda Morale stepped into the living room of a modest Seattle apartment, the real witness wasn't the grieving widow. It was the sulfur-crested cockatoo perched silently in the corner. The case seemed straightforward. A middle-aged accountant named Robert had reportedly slipped in the shower, fatally striking his head. But as Morales took statements, the bird, named Caesar, suddenly erupted with phrases that turned the investigation upside down. "Stop struggling, you idiot," the cockatoo screeched in Robert's distinct baritone, followed by a chillingly accurate mimicry of a thud and the words, "Nobody will ever know." The widow turned pale. She'd insisted she'd been at her sister's that night, but Caesar's performance suggested otherwise. Avian mimicry isn't just parroting, it's a complex neurological feat few species master. Cockatoos possess a specialized vocal organ called the syrinx, allowing them to reproduce sounds with eerie precision, from car alarms to human speech patterns. But what made Caesar's outburst legally significant was the context. Unlike random phrases learned over time, his reenactment paired violence-associated words with acoustic cues: the thud, the hushed tone that behavioral experts confirmed matched stress vocalizations in both humans and parrots. Forensic ornithologists testified that cockatoos preferentially mimic emotionally charged sounds, arguments, laughter, or in this case, what sounded like a fatal confrontation. The defense argued the bird could have picked up the phrases from a TV show, but prosecutors had a smoking beak, literally. Audio analysis revealed Caesar had reproduced the exact cadence and pitch of Robert's voice under duress, verified by comparing it to the victim's old voicemails. Even more damning, the cockatoo only performed the sequence when the widow entered the room, suggesting he associated her presence with the traumatic event. This wasn't just repetition, it was contextual memory, something researchers once believed impossible in birds. The case hinged on a groundbreaking study from the Avian Brain Institute, which proved parrots construct sound maps of their social environment. When a phrase is tied to a high-stakes event like witnessing violence, their brains encode it differently, linking the memory to specific people or locations. Caesar's outburst wasn't random chatter, it was a playback of his owner's final moments, triggered by seeing the person present during that trauma. Legal precedent around animal testimony is murky, but Caesar's confession was admitted as corroborative evidence when paired with forensic proof. Crime scene analysts had missed faint drag marks near the shower, inconsistent with a slip, but the bird's mention of struggling prompted a re-examination. Luminol revealed traces of blood in the hallway, proving the body had been moved. This case reshaped how law enforcement interacts with pets at crime scenes. Birds' ability to timestamp memories through vocalization is now a focus of study. Some species can recall and reproduce sounds weeks after hearing them once. In Caesar's case, the widow's conviction wasn't just due to his mimicry, it was how his timing exposed her lies. She swore she hadn't been home, yet the bird reacted exclusively to her. The kicker: after her arrest, Caesar stopped saying the incriminating phrases entirely, as if his job was done. Today, detectives in 14 states receive training on avian witness behaviors, recognizing that a pet's silence can be as telling as its speech. Because while criminals might remember to wipe down surfaces or ditch weapons, few consider the feathered witness watching from its perch, one whose brain is hardwired to replay their darkest moments on command. And somewhere out there, another killer is sweating bullets, unaware that the most damning testimony might not come from a person, but a creature that never forgets a voice or a scream. Wildlife biologists in rural Kentucky were tracking a tagged fox squirrel named Dodger as part of a reforestation study, until his GPS collar started transmitting erratic signals from inside an abandoned farmhouse. The team assumed Dodger had gotten trapped, but when they arrived with nets and tranquilizers, they found the back door pried open and the windows blacked out. Inside, what should have been a dusty, empty space instead hummed with industrial-grade grow lights and the pungent odor of marijuana. Dodger wasn't stuck. He'd uncovered a sophisticated drug operation camouflaged to avoid aerial detection, and the criminals had made one fatal mistake, underestimating the curiosity of a squirrel with a tech upgrade. Dodger's tracking collar was part of a new generation of wildlife tags that record environmental data. Unlike old radio collars that simply ping locations, these devices monitor temperature, humidity, and even air composition, metrics that tipped off researchers. The collar's logs showed Dodger had spent 3 days moving between the farmhouse's rafters, where the heat signature and CO2 levels were wildly inconsistent with a vacant building. Even more telling, the device detected THC particles in the air at concentrations 20 times higher than background levels, a smoking gun that prompted biologists to call the cops. Here's where animal science collided with police work in an unprecedented way. The same thermal imaging tools used to study nocturnal wildlife behavior revealed heat leaks from the farmhouse's modified ventilation system. Acoustic sensors designed to record bat echolocation picked up the rhythmic hum of hydroponic pumps, but the real breakthrough came from Dodger himself. Squirrels habitually cache food in hundreds of locations, and his collar's movement patterns mapped every access point the dealers used, including a tunnel hidden beneath a doghouse that even police dogs had missed. The raid netted over 400 plants and 7 arrests, but the bigger story was how wildlife tech became forensic gold. Modern tracking tags can now detect gunpowder residue, methane from meth labs, or even the ammonia scent of human sweat. Data points law enforcement is actively mining. In Arizona, a tagged Raven's flight path exposed an illegal dump site when its accelerometer recorded repeated dives toward barrels leaking toxic chemicals. In urban areas, pigeons outfitted with air quality sensors have pinpointed underground meth operations by detecting solvent vapors rising through sewer grates. What makes these cases revolutionary isn't just the tech, it's the animal's ability to go where humans can't. A squirrel scrambles through attic vents without raising suspicion. A raven lands on a rooftop stash no cop could access without a warrant. These creatures don't just stumble upon crimes, their natural behaviors create living surveillance networks, especially when enhanced with sensors. The lesson for criminals: you might dodge drones or disable security cameras, but when the local wildlife starts working with the feds, there's nowhere left to hide. And as tracking tech shrinks, some tags are now smaller than a thumbnail. The list of accidental animal informants is growing, because in the end, the most elusive criminal isn't the one who outsmarts the cops. It's the one who forgets to account for the four-legged, feathered, or furry witnesses passing silently overhead. When an elderly widow passed away suddenly in her Connecticut home, doctors initially attributed her death to natural causes until someone noticed the lone survivor in her fish tank. While the rest of a prized goldfish collection floated belly up, a single scrappy fantail named Bubbles continued swimming laps, his gills flaring defiantly against water that should have been lethal. That goldfish's stubborn refusal to die became the first clue in a murder investigation that rewrote the playbook on aquatic toxicology. Forensic analysis of the tank water revealed trace amounts of ethylene glycol, the main component in antifreeze diluted to a concentration that would kill most fish within hours. But Bubbles had a genetic quirk. He belonged to a rare line of ornamental goldfish selectively bred for toxin resistance, a trait developed by Asian breeders to withstand polluted urban waterways. His biology essentially functioned as a living toxicology report. While the widow's autopsy showed barely detectable poison levels thanks to rapid decomposition, the fish tank preserved evidence the killer couldn't erase. Here's the chilling science behind it. Fish metabolize toxins differently than humans. Their gills act like chemical filters, trapping and concentrating waterborne substances in their bloodstream at rates up to 10 times faster than mammals. A concentration harmless to humans could massacre an aquarium in minutes, but Bubbles' liver produced unusually high levels of alcohol dehydrogenase, the same enzyme hospitals used to treat antifreeze poisoning. This biological fluke turned him into an unintentional crime scene analyst, surviving just long enough for detectives to connect the dots. The real breakthrough came when chemists analyzed the brown algae streaks on the tank's glass. These microscopic bands preserved a chronological record of the poisoning event, similar to tree rings. Using mass spectrometry, they identified alternating layers of normal fish waste and ethylene glycol residues, proving someone had added the poison gradually, not in one fatal dose. This matched the widow's symptoms: weeks of unexplained nausea her doctor had misdiagnosed as stomach flu. criminals often assume poisoning is untraceable if the victim dies slowly. What they don't account for is the silent jury swimming in plain sight. Modern forensic aquariums now maintain control fish, hardy species like zebrafish or guppies, specifically to monitor for toxins in suspicious deaths. Their gill tissues can detect over 80 industrial chemicals at concentrations human autopsies miss. In one recent case, a betta fish's erratic swimming patterns led investigators to discover arsenic in a victim's tea set, the poison leaching into the bowl each time the suspect helped refill it. Bubbles' legacy lives on in an unlikely place, the Smithsonian's Forensic Archives, where his preserved body serves as a teaching tool. His gill filaments, still bearing microscopic antifreeze crystals, demonstrate how aquatic organisms timestamp poison exposure with terrifying accuracy. Because while killers might remember to wear gloves or wipe fingerprints, few think to flush the family pet, and that oversight is sending more murderers to prison than ever before. The next time you dismiss goldfish as forgetful decorations, consider this. Their biology encodes truths no human witness could ever provide. And in courtrooms across the country, that truth is swimming to the surface, one tank at a time. A crime scene seemed impossible to decipher, a brutal assault in a remote Appalachian cabin with no footprints, no fingerprints, and no murder weapon. Just blood spatter on the walls and one inexplicable detail: a dead little brown bat curled on the windowsill, its tiny claws clutching what looked like shreds of fabric. Investigators almost dismissed it as irrelevant wildlife interference until a sharp-eyed forensic entomologist noticed something chilling. Those fibers weren't random debris. They matched the distinctive polyester-cotton blend of the prime suspect's work shirt down to the dye lot, placing him at the scene with evidence no human could have planted. Bats are nature's accidental crime scene photographers. Their wing membranes and claws are covered in microscopic hooks and ridges that snag fibers, pollen, and even skin cells as they navigate tight spaces. This particular species, Myotis lucifugus, hunts by skimming surfaces to scoop insects, a behavior that turned it into an unwitting evidence collector. As it swooped through the cabin's broken window that night, its wings brushed against the killer's clothing, while its claws latched onto loose threads during a panicked collision with the victim. What seemed like tragic happenstance became the case's turning point. Chiropteran forensics, the study of bats in criminal investigations, is rewriting how trace evidence is collected. Unlike birds that preen away foreign material, bats retain debris for days due to their grooming habits. Their saliva contains enzymes that preserve biological samples. One lab successfully extracted a rapist's DNA from fibers in a bat's claws 3 weeks after the attack. The Appalachian case went further. Analysis of the bat's stomach contents revealed traces of the victim's blood, ingested when the animal licked its furred membranes clean. This established the exact hour of death based on the bat's feeding cycle. They hunt at precise intervals dictated by circadian rhythms. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the bat's guano. Droppings found near the cabin contained keratin particles matching the suspect's hair, which he'd shed during the struggle. Because bats digest food within 20 minutes, this biological timestamp proved he was present when the murder occurred, not miles away as he'd claimed. Today, detectives in rural areas routinely check nearby bat colonies when evidence seems thin. A single roost can preserve a mosaic of trace materials: gunpowder residue caught in wing folds, synthetic fibers trapped in toe hairs, or even the mineral signatures of soil tracked in by killers. These silent witnesses don't just solve crimes, they redefine what evidence means. Because while criminals might remember to burn their clothes or bleach a weapon, few consider the tiny nocturnal creatures flitting through the darkness, each one a potential archive of their darkest secrets. What makes bats uniquely damning is their movement patterns. Using acoustic reconstruction, scientists can now map a bat's flight path through crime scenes by analyzing debris distribution on its body. Like a furry black box recorder, every collision, every graze against an object leaves a traceable pattern. In the Appalachian case, the bat's trajectory proved the killer had moved the victim's body post-mortem, a detail that shattered his alibi. The lesson for criminals: you can silence human witnesses, destroy surveillance footage, and torch evidence. But when the night itself takes notes in the form of creatures we're only beginning to understand, justice finds wings. And somewhere in the dark, another bat circles, its body a living ledger waiting to be read. Off the coast of Maine, a tagged lobster named Admiral became the most unexpected undercover agent in Coast Guard history. Researchers from the University of New Hampshire had been tracking his movements for a climate study, expecting him to follow the usual seasonal migration along the continental shelf. But when Admiral's GPS signal suddenly veered 40 miles off course into international waters, marine biologists assumed a technical glitch, until the same anomaly happened with 6 other tagged lobsters in the area. The truth was stranger than fiction. These crustaceans had become living breadcrumbs leading straight to an underwater crime scene. Admiral's detour wasn't random. Lobsters navigate using geomagnetic sensitivity. Tiny iron oxide crystals in their antennae function like biological compasses. When poachers began illegally harvesting them with steel traps equipped with powerful magnets, a trick to bypass tracking buoys, the disrupted magnetic field sent the lobsters spiraling off their natural path. Each time Admiral approached one of these rigged traps, his tracking data spiked with erratic loops and circles, precisely the behavior seen in lab tests with electromagnetic interference. The real breakthrough came when analysts overlaid Admiral's path with satellite imagery. His zigzagging trail intersected with a derelict cargo ship anchored just outside U.S. waters, a vessel supposedly carrying engine parts according to its manifest. Coast Guard divers investigating the area didn't just find illegal lobster traps. They discovered false hull compartments packed with contraband, from rare abalone to stolen nautical equipment. The lobsters' disrupted migration had inadvertently mapped the smugglers' entire operation, revealing drop points and transit routes no human surveillance had detected. Marine biologists explained why this worked so well. Lobsters are creatures of precision. Their movements follow predictable thermal and chemical gradients. Any deviation, like sudden exposure to electromagnetic fields or abnormal water temperatures near smuggling vessels running silent, leaves a forensic signature in their tracking data. Modern tags can even detect minute changes in water pressure caused by divers retrieving submerged contraband. In Admiral's case, his shell retained traces of a proprietary epoxy used exclusively on the smugglers' crates, linking him physically to the crime scene. This case revolutionized maritime law enforcement. Researchers now deploy sentinel lobsters with enhanced sensors near high-risk zones, creating a living surveillance network. Their biological responses, from altered heart rates when detecting diesel fumes to avoidance behavior near sonar jamming devices, function as an early warning system. The technique has since exposed everything from illegally dredged scallop beds to narco submarines, proving that sometimes the best detectives wear their skeletons on the outside. What criminals fail to consider is that lobsters aren't just animals, they're environmental recorders. Their calcified growth rings, like tree rings, archive water chemistry changes. When authorities examined Admiral's molted exoskeleton, they found traces of a rare Albanian marine varnish used on the smugglers' crates, dated to the exact week of the operation. Turns out you can't bribe a lobster to forget, and in the cold depths of the Atlantic, countless more are silently cataloging crimes, their biological data waiting to surface at the perfect moment. The sleepy town of Millfield, Ohio, might never have cracked its biggest farm equipment heist if it hadn't been for a cantankerous Nubian goat named Gertrude. The case began when $12,000 worth of tractors and harvesters vanished overnight from a family-owned farm, leaving behind nothing but tire tracks in the mud. With no security cameras and few leads, deputies were stumped until Gertrude took matters into her own hooves. During a routine neighborhood canvass, officers brought the prime suspect, a disgruntled former farmhand, to the property for questioning. As the man stood in the barnyard spinning his alibi, Gertrude, who'd been peacefully grazing moments earlier, suddenly lowered her head and charged. With pinpoint accuracy, she rammed her horns into the man's thigh, sending him sprawling into a hay bale. The force was so violent, it left a bruise in the exact shape of Gertrude's distinctive curved horns, a detail that later matched photos of the suspect's injury when he sought medical treatment. Animal behaviorists weren't surprised. Goats possess an exceptional memory for faces and an acute sense of justice. Studies from the University of London show caprines can distinguish between photographs of familiar and unfamiliar humans even after 2 years apart, and they hold grudges against those who have wronged them. In Gertrude's case, the suspect hadn't just stolen equipment, he'd once kicked her during a dispute over feeding times. Her violent reaction wasn't random aggression, it was a calculated response to a recognized threat. The real breakthrough came when deputies searched the suspect's truck. Tiny grooves on the stolen tractor's ignition matched the unique wear pattern of Gertrude's horns, proving he'd used them as a makeshift tool to hotwire the vehicle. But the clincher, forensic analysis of the suspect's pants revealed traces of alfalfa pollen and goat saliva, placing him at the scene during the theft. When confronted with Gertrude's unshakable testimony, not to mention his own limp, the suspect cracked, confessing to the crime in full. This case forced law enforcement to reconsider how livestock interactions are treated as evidence. Goats, like dogs, exhibit targeted aggression, and their attacks often correlate with prior negative experiences. Modern farm theft investigations now include behavioral assessments of resident animals, recognizing that a sudden change in demeanor, like a normally docile goat turning combative, can be as telling as a fingerprint. Gertrude's story isn't just about brute force, it's a masterclass in animal cognition. Goats communicate through subtle ear movements and body language humans often miss, and their long-term memory rivals some primates. In controlled experiments, goats solved complex puzzles to access food rewards, remembering the solutions months later. That cognitive prowess, combined with a strong territorial instinct, makes them unlikely but effective crime fighters. The lesson for would-be thieves is simple. You might outsmart security systems or erase digital footprints, but there's no fooling a 200-pound walking lie detector with horns and a long memory. And as Gertrude proved, sometimes justice doesn't come with a badge, it comes with a bleat and a well-timed headbutt. The call came in as a routine missing pet report. A 10-foot Burmese python named Jupiter had slithered out of its enclosure in a suburban Texas home. Animal control officers arrived expecting to find the snake curled under a porch or wrapped around a tree branch. What they uncovered instead was a crime scene so bizarre, it rewrote the playbook on reptile-assisted investigations. Jupiter's escape route told the real story. While searching the house, officers noticed a heating vent in the reptile room had been pried open just wide enough for a large constrictor to squeeze through. But when they followed the ductwork, the trail dead-ended at a blank wall, or so it seemed. The lead officer, a former herpetology student, knew something was off. Pythons are ectotherms. They don't wander aimlessly. They follow heat gradients with military precision. If Jupiter abandoned a perfectly warm terrarium, something far hotter was calling to it. Thermal imaging confirmed their hunch. The wall concealed a hidden chamber radiating 98 degrees perfect basking temperature for a tropical snake. Behind drywall camouflaged with the same floral wallpaper as the rest of the house, investigators found a hydroponic marijuana operation spanning 300 square feet. Grow lights and heating mats had created an irresistible thermal beacon, drawing Jupiter straight to the source like a scaly homing missile. Here's where reptile biology turned the case. Snakes don't just seek warmth, they remember productive heat sources. Jupiter's owner, supposedly a harmless reptile enthusiast, had actually been using the python as living insulation. The snake's nightly trips between the drug lab and its enclosure left microscopic plant material in its scales, which forensic botanists matched to a rare hybrid strain only grown commercially in 2 other states. Even more damning, infrared cameras showed Jupiter returning to the exact spot every evening at 7:15, right when the grow lights cycled on. The snake's circadian rhythm became the prosecution's smoking gun, proving the lab operated on a predictable schedule that contradicted the owner's alibi. But the real forensic breakthrough came from Jupiter himself. Veterinarians examining the python found resinous deposits under its ventral scales, compounds identical to those exuded by flowering cannabis plants. Unlike mammals that metabolize toxins quickly, reptiles store foreign substances in their fatty tissues for months. Jupiter's blood work contained THC concentrations 20 times higher than environmental exposure could explain, meaning he'd been actively ingesting the drug, likely by lapping condensation from the grow room's humidifiers. This case revolutionized how law enforcement approaches reptile-inhabited properties. Snakes are now recognized as 4-legged thermal maps. Their movement patterns can expose hidden spaces no human officer would notice. In Florida, a ball python's persistent attempts to access a closet led detectives to a false ceiling concealing stolen firearms. In Arizona, Gila monsters were found nesting in insulation behind a meth lab, their venom toxicology reports revealing chemical byproducts that placed suspects at the scene. Jupiter's legacy lives on in an unexpected place: drug enforcement training manuals. His photo now illustrates a chapter on zoological indicators, teaching agents to recognize when an animal's behavior screams that something's wrong. Because while criminals might remember to silence phones or disable security systems, few consider the testimony of a creature that sees the world in infrared, remembers every heat source it's ever encountered, and carries proof of its travels in the very fabric of its skin. The next time a pet goes missing, consider this: that animal might not be lost at all. It could simply be following evidence only it can sense, leading investigators straight to truths that would otherwise stay walled away forever. When the coroner arrived at the isolated Oregon farmhouse, the scene looked like a tragic accident. An elderly man slumped over his kitchen table, a half-eaten plate of eggs congealing in front of him. Heart failure seemed the obvious conclusion until someone checked the chicken coop. Inside, the dead man's prized flock of Rhode Island Reds told a very different story with their eggs. The normally punctual layers hadn't produced a single egg in 36 hours, their nesting boxes eerily empty. That biological anomaly cracked open a homicide investigation hinging on one of nature's most precise clocks, the circadian rhythms of chickens. Here's how agricultural forensics turned eggshells into evidence. Chickens don't lay randomly. Their oviposition cycles sync with daylight in near-perfect 26-hour patterns. The moment stress, danger, or environmental disruption interrupts their routine, their reproductive systems slam the brakes. Forensic veterinarians examined the flock's ovaries and found developing yolks that should have been laid the morning of the farmer's death. Except the chickens had reabsorbed them, a biological failsafe triggered by acute trauma. The timing pointed to a violent disturbance between 4 and 6 a.m., when the hens would have been settling into their pre-laying rituals, but the real smoking gun came from the eggs themselves. Chickens secrete a thin protein membrane called the bloom onto freshly laid eggs, a natural barcode recording precise conditions at the moment of deposition. Analysis revealed the last eggs collected before the farmer's death had unusually thick bloom layers, a stress response to pre-dawn noise or movement. Even more telling, the egg's air cells' tiny pockets that form as contents contract were 20% larger than normal, proving they'd been left in the nest boxes hours longer than usual before collection. This wasn't just irregular laying, it was the signature of a flock that had gone unnaturally silent, too frightened to vocalize their typical egg songs that would have drawn the farmer out to gather them. The investigation took a darker turn when detectives re-examined the victim's kitchen. His breakfast eggs contained traces of olendrin, a lethal plant toxin, but here's what didn't add up. The farmer always ate freshly laid eggs cooked immediately. Toxicology showed the poisoned eggs had been stored for at least a day before cooking, their albumin pH levels spiking in a way that only happens post-laying. Someone had swapped his usual morning eggs with tainted ones from the fridge, knowing he wouldn't notice the difference. The chicken's testimony didn't stop there. Chickens recognize individual human faces and voices, and these hens refused to enter their coop for days after the death, a behavior consistent with recognizing a threat. When detectives brought the prime suspect, the victim's nephew who stood to inherit the farm, near the flock, the birds erupted into alarm calls normally reserved for predators. Agricultural experts explained chickens can distinguish between familiar and unfamiliar footsteps, and these hens remembered the nephew's heavy tread from his late-night visit. This case revolutionized how rural crime scenes are processed. Modern forensic poultry studies now track variables like eggshell stress fractures indicating abrupt temperature changes, yolk carotenoid levels recording feed disruptions, and even pecking order shifts that signal human interference. In Germany, a similar case was solved when hens abruptly stopped using their favorite nesting box, the one positioned to see the driveway where their owner was ambushed. The lesson: chickens are living surveillance systems with internal clocks more accurate than most digital recorders. Their biology encodes timelines no criminal can fake, and their memories outlast even the craftiest alibi. So the next time you dismiss farm animals as simple creatures, remember, they might just crack your case wide open, one egg at a time. The Monterey Bay Aquarium had no reason to suspect anything unusual about their resident giant Pacific octopus until the day it started behaving like a nervous prison guard. For 3 consecutive nights, the normally reclusive cephalopod abandoned its usual hiding spots, its skin flashing erratic patterns of dark stripes and pulsing spots. Keepers assumed it was stress-related until police revealed an alarming connection. Directly beneath the aquarium, an inmate from the nearby correctional facility had been tunneling through sewer lines in a brazen escape attempt. The octopus wasn't just acting strangely, it had sensed the intruder long before any human did. Octopuses don't just perceive their environment, they reconstruct it in startling detail. Each of their 8 arms contains nearly 10,000 chemotactile sensors, allowing them to taste molecules in water flow changes imperceptible to humans. When the prisoner disturbed decades-old pipes, microscopic shifts in water pressure and chemical composition alerted the octopus to the disturbance. Even more impressive, the creature's color-changing skin wasn't random distress signals. It was attempting to mimic the flickering patterns of flashlights it detected through the aquarium's filtration system, a behavior marine biologists later replicated in controlled experiments. This case forced scientists to reconsider cephalopod intelligence. Octopuses possess 9 brains, 1 central brain, and 8 auxiliary neural clusters in each arm, giving them a distributed consciousness that processes threats differently than vertebrates. Where humans might hear distant digging as abstract noise, the octopus experienced it as a multidimensional threat map, interpreting vibrations through its suction cup's hydrostatic pressure sensors. Prison officials later confirmed the escape route passed within 15 feet of the aquarium's seawater intake pipes, close enough for the octopus to detect minute temperature fluctuations caused by the convict's body heat radiating through the tunnels. The escapee made it just halfway before being recaptured, but the real story was how the octopus had essentially predicted his route. Aquarium logs showed the animal had begun congregating near the exhibit's western wall, the precise orientation of the tunnel 72 hours before the breakout attempt. Modern cephalopod research suggests they can form mental models of spaces they've never seen, extrapolating from subtle environmental cues. In essence, the octopus wasn't just reacting to disturbances, it had mentally reconstructed the underground architecture and identified the intrusion as a human-shaped anomaly moving toward the surface. Forensic marine biologists now study octopus behavior as a potential security augmentation. Their ability to detect pH changes could expose chemical leaks, while their sensitivity to electromagnetic fields might uncover unauthorized electronics. One prison in Norway even trials an octopus-assisted monitoring system, where the animal's reactions to underground disturbances trigger alerts. What makes this case unforgettable isn't just the octopus's predictive abilities, it's how the prisoner's own voice sealed his fate. During interrogation, he mentioned hearing weird clicking sounds in the tunnels. Only later did researchers realize the octopus had been rhythmically tapping its beak against the glass, a behavior never observed outside mating context. Whether it was attempting to communicate or simply investigating remains a mystery, but one thing's certain: when you're tunneling toward freedom, the last thing you expect is an 8-legged warden counting your footsteps from 300 feet away. Detectives arrived at the rural Indiana farm expecting to find a drug stash buried in the fields, but what they discovered was far more baffling. The entire scene looked like it had been scrubbed clean. No bags of cocaine, no cash bundles, not even broken twigs to mark where evidence might have been hidden. The only witnesses, a dozen hogs rooting contentedly in the mud. What initially seemed like a dead end became one of forensic science's most unconventional breakthroughs, turning the farmer's pigs from accidental accomplices into unwitting timekeepers of the crime. At first glance, the hogs appeared to be the culprits behind the missing evidence. Swine have notoriously indiscriminate appetites. Their powerful jaws can crush bone, and their digestive systems dissolve everything from leather shoes to aluminum cans. When investigators noticed torn plastic shreds near the trough, they assumed the drugs had been consumed and destroyed. But Dr. Elias Ruiz, a veterinary pathologist specializing in livestock forensics, spotted something everyone else missed. The pigs weren't just random garbage disposals. They were living, breathing clocks. Here's how porcine digestion cracked the case. Unlike humans, pigs process food in predictable, measurable stages. Plant matter moves through their system in roughly 12 hours. Proteins take 18, and indigestible materials like plastic or rubber resurface in their waste within 24 to 36 hours. By examining the stomach contents of several hogs, Ruiz reconstructed a timeline more precise than any security footage could provide. The pigs had ingested shreds of vacuum-sealed plastic, but crucially, none contained drug residues. This meant the bags had been emptied before being tossed to the hogs, disproving the suspect's claim that he'd never seen the missing cocaine. Even more damning, the pig's waste held microscopic traces of a rare binding agent used exclusively by one Colombian cartel to compress bricks of cocaine. This chemical marker, though partially broken down, retained enough of its structure to be identified through mass spectrometry. Normally, such trace evidence would degrade beyond recognition in soil or water, but the pig's digestive acids had preserved it in a semi-stable state, encapsulated in fibrous fecal matter like biological time capsules. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the hog's teeth marks. When the suspect argued the pigs could have eaten the evidence anytime, forensic odontologists proved him wrong. Each hog's unique dental wear patterns matched striations on the recovered plastic, showing the bags had been chewed recently within a 2-hour window, matching the suspect's alibi gap. One particularly aggressive hog named Bertha had even cracked a molar on a hidden tracking device, its shattered edges perfectly aligning with GPS fragments found in the suspect's truck bed. This case revolutionized how law enforcement treats livestock-involved crime scenes. Pigs don't just destroy evidence, they curate it. Their stomachs compartmentalize materials by density, creating layered, digestive strata that coroners can read like tree rings. Modern forensic farms now raise control pigs fed standardized diets to establish baseline decomposition rates for everything from synthetic fabrics to human remains. In Arkansas, a similar case was solved when pigs excreted undigested strips of duct tape matching a kidnapper's roll, while in Texas, hog hair analysis revealed exposure to gasoline used in an arson cover-up. What makes porcine forensics so powerful is its brutal simplicity. Criminals might bleach a crime scene or burn documents, but few consider the testimony of animals whose biology turns every meal into a forensic ledger. And as investigators in Indiana learned, when you're facing a hungry hog, the clock starts ticking literally. One nibble, one chew, one digestive cycle, and the truth isn't just buried. It's waiting, perfectly preserved in the unlikeliest of places. Along the rugged border trails of Arizona, a weary Border Patrol agent spotted something unusual. A lone mule wandering without its handler, its saddlebags sagging with unseen weight. The animal showed no signs of distress, plodding confidently down a well-worn smuggling route as if following an invisible command. When officers emptied its leather pouches, they expected kilos of narcotics or bundles of cash. Instead, they found meticulously folded slips of paper covered in intricate symbols, a cipher so elaborate it stumped cryptographers for weeks. This wasn't just a lost pack animal. It was a living, breathing courier in a criminal operation that had taken a page from centuries of wartime espionage. Decoding the messages revealed why smugglers chose mules over technology. Each note contained GPS coordinates, shipment quantities, and buyer aliases, but the real genius was in the delivery system. Unlike electronic communication vulnerable to wiretaps or digital forensics, handwritten ciphers left no metadata trail. The mule's innate route-finding abilities allowed it to navigate checkpoints without suspicious detours, relying on terrain memory passed down through generations of working stock. And if intercepted, the animal's blank stare gave away nothing, while a cell phone in the wrong hands could expose an entire network. History is littered with animals turned covert operatives. During the Civil War, Union forces used homing pigeons to transmit Confederate troop movements, their tiny leg capsules containing microfilmed maps invisible to the naked eye. World War II saw British intelligence attach incendiary devices to rats, knowing the Germans would toss the carcasses into furnace rooms, triggering explosions deep inside enemy facilities. Even the ancient Persians employed messenger horses with bridles rigged to yank their own tongues if captured, preventing vocal cues that might reveal their home stables. But the Arizona mule case exposed a modern twist: criminals exploiting biological instincts humans have spent millennia refining. Unlike dogs or pigeons requiring training, mules naturally adhere to routines. Leave one at a familiar trailhead and it'll walk the path autonomously, pausing at predetermined watering holes where handlers could swap cargo without direct contact. Their legendary stubbornness became an asset too. Startled mules often freeze rather than flee, giving smugglers precious minutes to vanish if authorities appeared. Forensic veterinarians discovered even subtler tricks. The mule's horseshoes were magnetized just enough to throw off thermal scanners by mimicking natural mineral deposits. Its ear notches corresponded to a numerical system used by a specific cartel faction, while wear patterns on its teeth revealed a diet of alfalfa grown only in one hidden valley used as a staging ground. Every physical detail functioned as part of the code, turning the animal into a walking encryption key. This wasn't just clever improvisation. It was the revival of an ancient practice called zoologic cryptography, where animals become living ciphers. Medieval monks trained monastery cats to carry scrolls in their collars, knowing invaders wouldn't scrutinize pests. Renaissance bankers used falcons to transport ledger updates between trading houses, exploiting the birds' immunity to highway bandits. The Arizona smugglers had simply updated an age-old playbook, one where the messenger is biologically incapable of betrayal. The fallout reshaped interdiction strategies. K9 units now trained to detect paper inks and adhesives used in animal-borne messages. Biologists consult on cases involving migratory species that might be repurposed as seasonal couriers. And that intercepted mule, it became a permanent resident at a federal training facility, its worn trails helping agents map smuggling networks it once served. Because sometimes cracking a criminal empire starts not with wiretaps or surveillance, but by listening to the silent testimony of creatures who have been carrying secrets long before humans ever dreamed of encryption. The abandoned textile mill had been written off as just another decaying eyesore until urban explorers reported something odd. Every time they ventured inside, rats would scatter in eerily precise patterns, funneling toward one boarded-up office before vanishing completely. At first, locals dismissed it as typical rodent behavior, but when police analyzed thermal drone footage, the truth emerged: those rats weren't just nesting. They'd become unwitting cartographers, mapping a hidden drug lab right under investigators' noses. Here's how rodent movement cracked the case. Rats navigate environments using pheromone trails, chemical breadcrumbs that create communal highways between food, water, and shelter. Normally, these paths meander organically, but in the mill, forensic ecologists noticed something unnatural. Dozens of trails converged at a seemingly random second-floor wall before abruptly stopping. Thermal imaging revealed why the wall was hollow, its interior maintained at a constant 78 degrees by heat lamps. The rats weren't disappearing, they were slipping through a pencil-width gap near the baseboards, drawn to the warmth like furry little homing beacons. What made this discovery revolutionary was the precision of the data. Rats don't just move randomly, their travel patterns form predictable networks called movement polygons. By tagging several rats with non-toxic UV powder and tracking their nightly routes, investigators reconstructed the lab's layout without ever breaching the wall. The powder traces glowed brightest along paths leading to ventilation ducts, areas where drug fumes seeped out, attracting rodents with their high-calorie content. One particularly bold rat named Goliath even revealed the lab's delivery system. His UV-dusted paws left prints on a disguised dumbwaiter that lowered packages into the sewer system. But the real breakthrough came from understanding rat social dynamics. Dominant males consistently took the shortest routes to the hidden compartment, while younger rats circled nervously at the periphery. This hierarchy mirrored human security protocols. The alpha rats had learned to avoid certain pressure-sensitive floorboards the dealers had booby-trapped. Ecologists realized they weren't just tracking vermin, they were observing a fully integrated biological alarm system. The criminals had unknowingly outsourced their perimeter defense to the very creatures they thought were irrelevant. This case didn't just solve a drug operation, it birthed an entirely new field called forensic rodentology. Today, law enforcement analyzes chew marks to estimate how long evidence has been stashed. Rat incisors grow at predictable rates, leaving timestamp-like striations. They study nest material composition to pinpoint where suspects sourced their packaging. Some departments even deploy sentinel rats with embedded trackers, leveraging their natural curiosity to explore spaces drones can't reach. The mill's rats did more than expose a hidden room. They proved that every criminal operation, no matter how carefully planned, creates ripples in the ecosystem around it. And in the shadows, there's always a creature paying attention, its tiny brain cataloging details that could bring empires crashing down. So the next time you dismiss a scurrying rat as just another pest, remember, it might already be building a case file, one whisker twitch at a time. From a parrot replaying a victim's final words to a dolphin uncovering a murder weapon with sonar, these cases prove that nature's witnesses often see what humans miss. Think about it, bloodhounds tracking scents across rivers, bees leading investigators to hidden graves, even an octopus detecting an escape tunnel through subtle water pressure changes. Each story shatters the assumption that criminals only need to outsmart human investigators. The reality, they're up against millions of years of evolutionary instincts, sensory superpowers, and memories sharper than any surveillance footage. Take Buddy the African grey parrot, whose mimicry wasn't just eerie, it was a courtroom-ready reenactment of a murder, or the honeybees that pinpointed a corpse by sensing decomposition gases humans can't smell. These aren't lucky accidents, they're demonstrations of how animals process the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. A cat's fur becomes a DNA time capsule. A lobster's internal compass exposes smuggling routes. Even a barn owl's feathers trapped paint particles like forensic swabs, unraveling a burglary ring. What's truly humbling is how often criminals overlook these silent observers. They'll disable cameras, wear gloves, or bury evidence, but who thinks to bribe a bloodhound or silence a cockroach? Yet time and again, animals turn the tables, exploiting gaps in human logic. A mule's stubbornness makes it the perfect smuggling courier until its horseshoes give away a cartel's location. A rat's chewing habits timestamp evidence. Even a goat's grudge reveals an alibi's flaw with one well-aimed headbutt. So here's the question that lingers. If animals can crack cases with instincts alone, what does that say about the limits of human judgment? Maybe justice isn't just about fingerprints and alibis. Maybe it's also about listening to the creatures who have been solving crimes since long before detectives existed. Want more wild tales where nature outsmarts the bad guys? Hit subscribe, because the next criminal to underestimate animals might just be starring in our next video.